The preacher, Hobart Freeman, was a contemporary of people like Jimmy Swagger, Jimmy and Tammy Faye Baker, a lot of the televangelists of that era. But he was far more strict and far more heavy-handed in his religious indoctrination.
I'm Dale Paulke with Dakota Community Bank and Trust, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Wild Rides. I'm a cult survivor. Grew up the oldest of 5 sisters and 3 brothers. 2 parents that met in high school. My dad asked my mother out to prom, and they started dating from that point, if I'm remembering correctly. And my dad found out that my mother was going to go follow her dreams to get a psychology degree and a minor in arts at Bowling Green State University. And once my dad found out that was going to be her location for college, he also followed suit and went to Bowling Green State University. And he began to pursue the medical field to be a doctor and surgeon. And ultimately they married, and then I was born shortly thereafter. My mom obviously finished her degree first, and while I was like 3, 4, 5 years old, my dad was in medical residency. So during that time, my parents come across some friends in college who introduced them to the Christian faith, and they decide to follow that path. And they began to listen to some cassette tapes from a guy named Hobart Freeman. And as the teachings, began to be, what they began to follow, and to, they would have Bible studies and, basically meet and listen to these cassette tapes. So as that happened, they began to absorb and follow more and more of those teachings. So eventually my father decided, after hearing some cassette teachings, they would no longer follow the career of being a medical doctor. And he decided he would abandon that field, and ultimately kind of decided to kind of go more toward being in the ministry. My mom also eventually did move away from her psychology degree, and by the time I was 8 years old, my parents had gone back to Lima, Ohio, from the Bowling Green State University, Toledo area, and they decided to go to Indiana, where Hobart Freeman, this preacher that they'd been listening to on cassette tapes, was preaching these sermons. So my dad and mother sell everything, and we get on the Greyhound bus with 2 suitcases, and by this point 3 other brothers and sisters, and we make our way to Indiana and begin to, that first night in Indiana, we were attending a Wednesday night service, and that was our first introduction to actually going to what was called Faith Assembly. And the preacher, Hobart Freeman, was a contemporary of people like Jimmy Swagger, Jimmy and Tammy Faye Baker, a lot of the televangelists of that era. But he was far more strict and far more heavy-handed in his religious indoctrination. So by the time the mid-'80s had happened, there were multi-million-dollar lawsuits that were in progress because of things that he had advised people to do, and also because of deaths that took place. And so at first, you began to see people refusing medical treatment for their children, or young adults or teens, or even people that were significantly up in age going off their medication. Or it wasn't strange to see people pulling into the parking lot and because of these teachings taking off their glasses. So Hobart's teaching meant abstaining from any medical treatment of any kind other than prayer. The funny thing about it is that people would actually sneak and do homeopathic and natural remedies trying to adhere to this doctrine. So unfortunately, by age 11, I am starting to have significant asthma complications, what they now call stress-induced asthma. And so by age 11, first kind of began to, not be so severe, but by the time I'm 14, I'm having 3-day asthma episodes. And that ultimately ended up with me, going almost 3 years without medical treatment of any kind. So because of that, I'd be sitting on the sofa in front of a fan, in a wife beater, tank top t-shirt and trying to breathe, and would sit there for 3 days. Unfortunately, at this time, this is the early 90s, and by that point, over 100 deaths had taken place. And so by this point, the prosecutors in Kosciuszko County, Indiana, if you're not familiar with Kosciuszko County, Indiana, it's near Fort Wayne, Warsaw, Indiana areas. So by this time, people are going away. The prosecutors are prosecuting people that are following these doctrines, and they're going away for 10, 11, 9 years at a time. Experience, the sad moment in the movie, and, you feel the emotion. So I lost a range of emotion for that period of years. Unfortunately, when I was 14, I had a baby brother. By this point, there's 7 of us kids, and he is 6 months old and contracts meningitis. The sad thing I find out is that my father proceeded to not notify anybody other than him and my mother, and I think maybe 1 or 2 friends knew. But by the time his condition had declined to quite a significant point, an entire week passed. And one Saturday morning, I'm standing in the living room, and I see my dad on the sofa with my brother laying on his lap, and he's praying and profusely begging and crying and asking God to heal him. And he's beginning to expire. And unfortunately, I witness him passing, and I see him take his last breath. So for me, that was an extremely traumatizing experience. And for many years, I suffered some kind of a PTSD, some kind of a traumatic emotional response to that. And for like 10 years, I couldn't cry, couldn't experience, the sad moment in the movie, and, you feel the emotion. So I lost a range of emotion for that period of years. It wasn't until I responded to an altar call at church for prayer for emotional healing, and that began to restore my range of motion and restore my ability to respond emotionally. People would say, "I love you," I wouldn't feel anything. I remember a friend of mine, as by this point I'm a young adult, and I'm living with them at their home, and this particular gentleman was like a father to me and a mentor to me, and he began to kind of get me to climb out of my shell. And so for a period of time, I moved in with him and his 5 kids, and we'd get ready to go to bed, and he'd be like, "Go give Mr. Mike a hug." So all 5 of his kids would give me a hug, and I'd be passing him in the kitchen, and he'd walk up and just, give me a big bear hug, and help break down that resistance and that callous and that cold, numb place that I had retreated to, because the rest of my family grieved normally on some level, crying, tears, but I just remember freezing up. So for me, it was a journey. It was a path. It was a path out that took some time. When I was 12 years old, during those asthma episodes, during that period, I discovered the guitar, and had always been singing and playing music at 3 and 4 years old, wanting to sing and play music, but mainly was going to church and watching a lot of the worship leaders at our church play guitar. So at 12 years old, I talked to a buddy in our neighborhood, at the trailer park where we lived, into giving me his True Tone guitar, which I paid $4 for. And my dad, strangely enough, gave me the $4 to buy that guitar. And it was like a 68, 67 True Tone guitar. It had like a red headstock, kind of similar to what you see on a Fender guitar. And it had 2 strings on it when I first got it. And I begged my dad to let me mow some lawns in the trailer park. And I went and got my first full set of 6 strings, and I started listening to people like Susan Ashton, Wayne Kirkpatrick, Dan Huff, Jerry McPherson. These are all big session players in Nashville at that time. Susan Ashton was a very popular Christian artist, being produced by Wayne Kirkpatrick. If you're not familiar with Wayne Kirkpatrick, he wrote and produced with Tommy Sims the song "Change the World." And he's produced people like Little Big Town and many other country acts. For those people that go way back, he was a guitar player for Michael W. Smith, played rhythm. But that got me into songwriting. That got me into telling my story. It got me into feeling the emotions and experiences I was experiencing. And that got me to begin to put lyrics on paper. So fast forward to 2009. In 2009, I'd gone through a divorce by this point, after marrying into a very abusive marriage. I chose somebody who was very abusive and very verbally and emotionally abusive to me as a person. When you come up in abuse, I know at least for me, I developed a habit and an appetite for bringing abuse into my life. So for me, love was defined as an experience that was abusive. And if in psychology or counseling terms, they call that toxic love, or toxic love definitions, where I personally defined love as something that was very difficult, very strenuous, and something that was often abusive, but that's because I grew up with abuse. So I had toxic love definitions and didn't have a proper understanding what real love and what healthy love is like. So in 2009, I had by this point been unemployed and downsized out of a job since 2007, had gone through a divorce, and came to Nashville with a buddy who got signed to a black gospel music label. He invited me to come to Nashville. I come to Nashville, and the day I get here, my brakes go out in the parking lot. And my brake lines blew there in the Cool Springs Brewery parking lot down in Franklin, Tennessee. And I had $600 in the bank. I had lunch that day with some friends, and one of them was a pastor. And he had offered me a worship pastor job, and I was still very much kind of reeling from the job loss and the divorce. And in that process, I wasn't ready to take any risks. Music is definitely a daring endeavor, and in many ways, I think we're probably the most entrepreneurial, probably. We don't get considered that way, but the music, being an artist, being a musician is very much a business. So that day I was forced by Providence, I think, to stay in Nashville, and I couldn't go back to Ohio, couldn't go back to Lima, Ohio, where I was living at that time, and ended up staying in Nashville, staying in Franklin, and beginning my journey here to today. But I feel like that's what I've been doing in my life. I've been taking these stories, taking the pain, taking the trauma, taking the abuse, and putting it into a story. I tell my story through my music. You asked me about what does let it get the best of you mean. So about 3 years ago, I'm sitting on the front porch on a rocking chair and just kind of messing with that melody. Don't let it, and just kind of wrote that with a friend of mine, Sherry Pedigo, and another friend of mine, Cherry, and we, got the lyrics together and got the entire thought out there. But I feel like that's what I've been doing in my life. I've been taking these stories, taking the pain, taking the trauma, taking the abuse, and putting it into a story, and basically taking it like music was my path out. It was my way of clearing the crap off of my mental screen and processing what I have experienced. So to me, I feel like my story is about recovery, it's about redemption, it's about finding new life, it's about letting go of lies and deceit and finding truth and finding hope and finding faith. So that is what my music resonates with. One of the things that I've been blessed to do is partner with an organization called MAP International, Medicine for the World, aka Medical Assistance Program. It's been around since the days of like Billy Graham, and this particular organization takes medical supplies and medicines to third world countries, serving 13 to 20 million people a year. During this COVID crisis, they have been serving multiple states here in the United States with gloves, with sanitizers, with all kinds of different medical supplies needed to provide to doctors and nurses so they can safely treat people that are suffering with COVID. So MAP International came out of my journey and out of my book and telling my story. And when they heard my story and heard about my book, they were able to see a correlation between my story of suffering medical neglect and a story of taking medicines to people who would otherwise experience medical neglect or experience no treatment. And so something that was actually very devastating and very tragic for me is now going out there and changing lives and providing medication and providing help to other people. And so my story has been turned around and been able to help others who would otherwise not receive treatment. So not only do they do third world relief and helping with the COVID crisis, they do also disaster relief. And it's Steve Sterling, our CEO. You will often see on the Weather Channel. You'll see him in different public profiles, partnering with FedEx, UPS, Johnson & Johnson. They do disaster relief through a lot of the recent hurricanes in Puerto Rico and tornadoes out west that happened last year and tornadoes in Alabama. They go into those areas and they do things like take disaster health kits, which have like a bar of soap, first aid kit, thing of deodorant, a toothbrush, a wash rag, and they have these items in a Ziploc bag so that as people go through the transition of dealing with loss of homes and electricity and things of that nature, the conditions stay sanitary. And that's kind of one of the more recent things. I've also been blessed to be a part of the Ken Burns Country Music PBS special as a banjo player in the national marketing campaign for Ken Burns Country Music. So if you go on YouTube and go on the Bank of America website, you can see some of the work I've done with that as well. My book is called From Cult to Country, An Asthmatic's Journey to Find More Air. It's available on Amazon or pretty much any bookstore. As far as online, If you go to my website, themichaelricks.net, you can purchase it there, and I'll sign it for you and mail it to your home. This is also the rear of the book. I want to send a special thank you to Robbie Grayson. He is a local publisher here in Nashville, and he does a lot of profiles of survival stories and combat stories for our military veterans. And so I was really blessed to have his help with this book and get my story put in a book. So it's really been amazing to tell that story, take ownership of my story, and really see the change that came in my own life by just opening up and being honest and putting it on a page. It was very healing and very therapeutic for me to put that story, much like songwriting, on paper.